On August 18th in 1227, Genghis Khan, the Mongol leader who forged an empire stretching from the east coast of China west to the Aral Sea, continues his eternity in camp during a campaign against the Chinese kingdom of Xisha. The great Khan, who was over 60 and in failing health, may have succumbed to injuries incurred during a fall from a horse in the previous year. Genghis Khan was born as Temujin around 1162. His father, a minor Mongol chieftain, died when Temujin was in his early teens. Temujin succeeded him, but the tribe would not obey so young a chief. Temporarily abandoned, Temujin's family was left to fend for themselves in the wilderness of the steppes. By his late teens, Temujin had grown into a feared warrior and charismatic figure who had begun gathering followers and forging alliances with other Mongol leaders. After his wife was kidnapped by a rival tribe, Temujin organized a military force to defeat the tribe. Successful, he then turned against other clans and tribes and set out to unite the Mongols by force. Many warriors voluntarily came to his side, but those who did not were defeated and then offered the choice of obedience or death. The nobility of conquered tribes were generally executed. By 1206, Temujin was the leader of a great Mongol confederation and was granted the title Genghis Khan, translated as Oceanic Ruler or Universal Ruler. Khan promulgated a code of conduct and organized his armies on a system of 10. 10 men to a squad, 10 squads to a company, 10 companies to a regiment, and 10 regiments to a tumen. A fearful military unit made up of 10,000 cavalrymen. A tumen. Because of their nomadic nature, the Mongols were able to breed far more horses than sedentary civilizations, which could not afford to sacrifice farmland for large breeding pastures. All of Khan's warriors were mounted, and half of any given army was made up of armored soldiers wielding swords and lances. Light cavalry archers filled most of the remaining ranks. Khan's family and other trusted clan members led these highly mobile armies, and by 1209 the Mongols were on the move against China. Using an extensive network of spies and scouts, Khan detected a weakness in his enemies' defenses and then attacked the point with as many as 250,000 cavalrymen at once. When attacking large cities, the Mongols used sophisticated sieging equipment such as catapults and mangonels, and even diverted rivers to flood out the enemy. Most armies and cities crumbled under the overwhelming show of force, and the massacres that followed a Mongol victory eliminated thoughts of further resistance. Those who survived, and millions did not, were granted religious freedom and protection within the rapidly growing Mongol Empire. By 1227, Khan had conquered much of Central Asia and made incursions into Eastern Europe, Persia, and India. His great empire stretched from central Russia down to the Aral Sea in the west, and from northern China down to Beijing in the east. On August 18th in 1227, while putting down a revolt in the kingdom of Xisha, Genghis Khan continued his eternity. On his deathbed, he ordered that Xisha be wiped from the face of the earth. Obedient as always, Khan's successors leveled whole cities and towns, killing or enslaving all their inhabitants. Obeying his order to keep his death secret, Genghis's heirs slaughtered anyone who set eyes on his funeral procession, making its way back to Karakorum, the capital of the Mongol Empire. Still bringing death as he had in life, many were killed before his corpse was buried in an unmarked grave. His earthly body's final resting place still remains a mystery. The Mongol Empire continued to grow after Genghis Khan left, eventually encompassing most of the inhabitable Eurasia. The empire disintegrated in the 14th century, but the rulers of many Asian states claimed descendant from Genghis Khan and his captains. On August 18th in 1590, the Roanoke colony is deserted. John White, the governor of the Roanoke Island colony in present-day North Carolina, returns from a supply trip to England to find the settlement deserted. White and his men found no trace of the 100 or so colonists he left behind, and there was no sign of violence. Among the missing were Eleanor Dare, White's daughter, and Virginia Dare, White's granddaughter, and the first English child born in America. August 18th was to have been Virginia's third birthday. The only clue to their mysterious disappearance was the word Croatoan carved into the palisade that had been built around the settlement. White took the letters to mean that the colonists had moved to the Croatoan Island some 50 miles away, but a later search of the island found none of the settlers. The Roanoke Island colony, the first English settlement in the New World, was founded by English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh in August of 1585. The first Roanoke colonists did not fare well, suffering from dwindling food supplies and Indian attacks, and in 1586 they returned to England aboard a ship captained by Sir Francis Drake. In 1587, Raleigh sent out another group of 100 colonists under John White. White returned to England to procure more supplies, but the war with Spain delayed his return to Roanoke. By the time he finally returned in August of 1590, everyone had vanished. In 1998, archaeologists studying tree ring data from Virginia found that extreme drought conditions persisted between 1587 and 1589. These conditions undoubtedly contributed to the demise of the so-called lost colony, but where the settlers went after they left Roanoke remains a mystery. One theory has them being absorbed into a Native American tribe known as the Croatans. On August 18th in 1920, the 19th Amendment ratified thanks to one vote. A dramatic battle in the Tennessee House of Representatives ends with the state ratifying the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution on August 18th in 1920. After decades of struggle and protest by suffragettes across the country, the decisive vote is cast by a 24-year-old representative who reputedly changed his vote after receiving a note from his mother. America's suffrage movement was founded in the mid-19th century by women who had become politically active through their work in the abolitionist and temperance movements. In July 1848, 200 women suffragists, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, met in Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss women's rights. After approving measures asserting the right of women to educational and employment opportunities, they passed a resolution that declared, quote, "It is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise," unquote. For proclaiming a woman's right to vote, the Seneca Falls Convention was subjected to public ridicule, and some backers of women's rights withdrew their support. However, the resolution marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in our country. When Carrie Chapman Catt took over from Susan B. Anthony as president of the National American Women Suffrage Association in 1900, she prioritized the push for a constitutional amendment to give women the vote. At the outset of World War I, the National American Women Suffrage Association urged women to prove their worth to the war effort, while the National Women's Party, led by Lucy Burns and Alice Paul, engaged in civil disobedience, directly targeting President Woodrow Wilson with protests outside the White House. Finally, facing growing pressure on multiple fronts, Wilson called a special session of Congress in May of 1919 and personally appealed for women's suffrage. Having voted down the amendment 6 times, Congress finally approved it, sending it to the states for ratification. By March of 1920, just one more state was needed to ratify the 19th Amendment in order for it to become law. The Tennessee General Assembly took up the question in August, and suffragists and anti-suffragists bore down on Nashville. The state Senate voted convincingly to ratify, but the House failed to do so twice, by 2 votes of 48 to 48. State Rep. Harry T. Byrne, a 24-year-old from McMinn County, was one of the nay votes. Reportedly, he had intended to vote for ratification, but had been persuaded not to by telegrams from his constituents and members of his party. Just as a third vote was set to begin, Byrne received a letter from his mother, Feb Ensminger Byrne, that read in part, "Hurrah, and vote for suffrage and don't keep them in doubt. I've been watching to see how you stood, but have not seen anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy." On the third vote, Burns changed his mind. Thanks to his single vote, the House approved the amendment. Tennessee ratified it, and the Constitution was changed to guarantee women the right to vote. On August 26, the amendment was formally adopted into the Constitution by proclamation of Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby. Despite the ratification of the amendment and the decades-long contributions of black women to achieve suffrage, poll taxes, local laws, and other restrictions continue to block women and men of color from voting. It would take more than 40 years for all women to achieve voting equality. All historic information divulged and documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.